as God was redirecting my heart and reordering my loves to take them off of myself and to put them more on Him, He was slowly calling me into a life of ministry. And that was an amazing journey, and just showing God's faithfulness and His timing as we are patient for Him to answer those callings that He puts on our heart. My name's Andy Brown. I'm a senior creative specialist at Compassion International, and this is the story of my meandering journey through various careers to be able to land where I'm at now. I grew up on a hog farm in rural Illinois. My family was very involved in the church and in missions in general, and we had some of my parents' best friends that had been missionaries in Kenya for decades. So we would host missionaries like them when they would come home on furlough. I even had an aunt and uncle that moved to Nairobi, Kenya in the 90s, and a couple of cousins that were born there. So our house was constantly filled with, a fridge that was full of missionary magnets from around the world, and having people in our home that were missionaries. Despite all that, missions wasn't really on my radar growing up, because I thought to be a missionary, you had to either be like a Bible translator or a doctor or somebody that was teaching people how to grow corn. And I didn't realize that there were opportunities in the mission field for people like me. I always felt like missionaries are maybe put on a little bit of a pedestal, but also like not quite in the same culture that I'm in. Just felt like they are just growing up a world apart. They even have funny little accents. Their English wasn't quite the same as my English, and their worldview was completely different. And I couldn't strongly identify with that or have a desire to maybe go and join them in that work. But God had to do an amazing work in my heart to be able to pull me from my trajectory into His trajectory. And the crazy thing is now, those are my children, My children are the ones that when we came back to the US, people thought, oh, you talk a little funny and you look like an American, but you don't think like one. I wanted to study two things in college. I think I declared my major about 5th grade. I wanted to study computer science and piano performance, my two favorite subjects and favorite things to do, and something I was getting a lot of my identity from. And I didn't realize that you could use stuff like that on the mission field. Yeah, I wasn't sure how I would combine computer science and piano performance or music into a career. I just knew I loved both those subjects, and honestly, my desire at the time was pretty self-serving, pretty much wanting to make myself the hero of my own story. I wanted to be excellent at the piano, excellent musician. I wanted to be, for a little while considered, moving to Nashville and maybe being a studio musician there, a session musician, just sitting on different recording projects. When the band I was in didn't get offered a record contract when I graduated from college, I went into a software engineering degree. As a software engineer, I thought I'd have a pretty good chance to maybe retire early too, and I thought that would look pretty good. God kind of shut that door. I didn't understand how stock markets worked and stuff like that, and I gave up a bunch of stock options that could have allowed me the opportunity to do that. And for a little while, I was a little upset with God. How could you let me miss out on this opportunity to have made all this money off of stock options, in software? I could have done anything for you without having to work for it, and realized that what God was saying was He doesn't need my success. He doesn't need my wealth. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Money is no object to Him, and what He really wants is my heart. What He really wants is my service to Him and reprioritizing my loves to take it off myself. About the time I realized that, my wife and I had been praying about maybe going into full-time ministry. I met my wife the first day of college. We were both music majors at the time. She ended up with a degree called International Ministries with an emphasis in fine arts, because she wanted to go and teach the fine arts on the mission field, like a missionary school. And when we got engaged the summer before our senior year, she had to really kind of come to a crisis of calling. She was like, is God calling me to marry Andy, or is God calling me to the mission field? Because they can't both be true. They seem to be really incompatible dreams. And she almost called off the engagement, but obviously we went through with it. We got married, And here we are 26 years later. The amazing thing was of that story was like, as God was redirecting my heart and reordering my loves to take them off of myself and to put them more on Him, He was slowly calling me into a life of ministry. And 10 years after we got married, we were on the mission field together with our family of 5. And that was an amazing journey, and just showing God's faithfulness and His timing as we are patient for Him to answer those callings that He puts on our heart. My wife enrolled in seminary to get a degree in missions, and I decided to enroll in seminary part-time, very part-time. We were sitting in class with other people that were our age mates who were going into pastoral ministry. We realized, yeah, these pastors aren't anybody outside of our circles of, friends. Like, we could go into ministry. In fact, it would be really fun to go into ministry with people like this. Through those couple of years of seminary and getting to know some pastors, my wife and I started praying about going into full-time ministry. And I started to get just a greater dissatisfaction with my job in software engineering. So as we started praying about that, God opened some doors, and we ended up in Washington, D.C. area for 5 years as creative arts leaders at a non-denominational church there. That was the second chapter, that move into vocational ministry. And we had a great 5 years there, but God wasn't through redirecting us there. I had the opportunity while we lived in the DC area to travel with a friend to North Africa to help him and his family pack up their belongings as they were relocating back to the US after serving as missionaries in North Africa. And that was my first time really experiencing the church in the rest of the world. There was this saying that 80% of the world's trained Christian workers serve 20% of the world's Christian population, which would be the West, which would be the US. And for the first time, I had the opportunity to experience what it looks like when you've got, the other 80% of the world having to split up 20% of the world's Christian resources. I was in a country that it was very difficult to get Bibles in that language. There were very few Christians, maybe 300 in the whole country. And just kind of wanted to be part of joining God in His work on the mission field. Not really sure, again, exactly what artists do to be able to do that. And as I came back from that trip, I actually called my wife from North Africa middle of the night, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, but the Holy Spirit's stirring in my heart, and I think He might be calling us into missions. And she, had to pick herself up off the floor, because she'd kind of let that dream die at that point. And I came back from that trip, and we dedicated to pray about that. And maybe a few weeks into our really deep prayer, as we started reading that and we started praying, my aunt and uncle in Nairobi called and said, "We would love for you guys to come lead worship for a missionary conference in Kenya." And we're like, wow, what a coincidence, because we're actually praying about where God might be calling us into mission. So yes, we'd love to go do that. So we had the opportunity that year to travel to North Africa together, and then on the same trip to go down to Kenya. And while I was there, I met a missionary bush pilot who was leaving flying to do photojournalism full time. And we became good friends during that trip. And he shared that they were trying to start a field-based media team with the Africa Inland Mission. And we came back and prayed about that, and it just felt like God was just opening those doors to go and help establish that team. So I helped start this field-based media team. It was me and 2 AIM-era missionary bush pilots. And all 3 of us were hobbyists at that point. But we're on the mission field to be able to tell stories and to help missionaries be able to talk to their supporters, be able to raise prayer awareness for unreached people groups. And so we just responded to requests from AIM missionaries and also missionaries from other organizations, sister organizations that needed media support. And for 7 years, we traveled all throughout the continent with small crews just to meet with missionaries with some film equipment and be able to produce documentaries about the work that God was doing on the African continent. And during that time, we got challenged by our mission leadership to do something that was going to really help the African church stir their hearts towards greater involvement in missions, to produce a story that would help raise the temperature for missions involvement in the African church. So the African church wouldn't be waiting for Westerners to come and do the work that they were very capable of doing. So as we started considering how to do that, I thought, well, we're pretty good at making documentaries. We could do something around that. And we realized that really in the African culture, storytelling is king. That is really how you communicate values and inspiration to your audiences through story. So realized that we actually had to tell a story to do that. And we did some research. We were like, certainly somebody has done this before in the past somewhere. And we realized that no, it hadn't been really done, not on the scale that we wanted to do it, and that we were gonna have to do that. So we set about a 2-year journey to create a film, a feature film that would do this work. We had a scriptwriter on our team who had never written a feature length before, but was pretty talented writer. And the rest of us just kind of did film school through books and YouTube and like trying to figure out how you organize a production of this scale. So we ended up raising about $100,000. It was about a 3-year process to be able to create the feature film called The Distant Boat, which I had the opportunity to direct because I was the one guy on the team with a little bit of drama theater experience, I guess. As we started to create that story, we needed to understand really what the challenges were. Why aren't there more African missionaries? So we did a lot of research ahead of time to really identify what sort of the pain points were, what some of the issues with why there aren't more African missionaries. And we wrote a script to really kind of address those. And we did it through a fictional character who gets sent to the coast on a business trip. And while he's there, he gets beat up by thugs and saved by a Muslim fisherman. And he wakes up in this guy's house and he builds a relationship and a friendship with his family. And through the course of discovery, he realizes that he's the first Christian that they've ever met. He can't believe that, you know. He's in Nairobi and there's churches on every block, and he can't believe that there are places in his own country where there are no churches, where people have never met a Christian. And he kind of comes back to Nairobi bothered by that. So the main character, Max, feels like God actually might be using people like him to go and live cross-culturally, just doing business as missions and creating opportunities for conversation and friendships and relationships in places like that. So in a lot of ways, that was sort of what I felt like it was my story. Like, you know, God calling us to live cross-culturally by revealing to us that missionaries, that we're all called into missions, you know, we're all called to live missionally. We're all called to be a part of God's kingdom work wherever we're at. And sometimes he calls us to step outside of our comfort zone, to say no to a lot of things that make us safe and comfortable, and to go and do that among people that don't have that opportunity. I feel like stepping out in obedience to the Lord is sometimes saying no to the things that make us comfortable, even the things that make us feel successful. God doesn't need our successes. God asks us to just be obedient and to step out in faith sometimes. That's true for my life. I feel like the times when God was calling me to put on the shelf my dreams and visions for my own success, things that draw attention to me, and he replaced that with greater joy in service and ministry to him. And that's how we ended up on the mission field. Every step of my life, every new chapter was sort of introduced by those phases of trying something new. The first chapter was, just coming into fellowship with seminary students and with future pastors, and realizing that God could use us, people like us, artists in vocational ministry. And then the second was just taking the opportunity to go travel internationally to see what the church in the 1040 window is like. And God very graciously changed my heart, reordered my loves, to come into more alignment with what He had in store for me. And it wasn't about building up my own kingdom, it was about building up His. When God called us back to the U.S. after 7 years on the mission field, while that was hard, it was actually God continuing to graciously open doors for greater kingdom impact. It wasn't like the missions field was the highlight of our lives. It's actually just a continual vector of serving the Lord. And when we moved back to the States, wasn't quite sure where we were going to land, but we felt like Colorado Springs was a good place to be. And God very graciously opened the opportunity for me to work at Compassion, who happened to be looking for people with cross-cultural ministry experience and storytelling experience. And now I get to serve not just the churches in Africa, which I do, but churches around the world with doing video creation and creative asset development. So it's been amazing that God actually hasn't wasted anything. Not even my piano skills, not even the piano degree wasn't even wasted. God didn't waste any moment of our story. And He's been the one that's been like gently reprioritizing our loves and our hearts to be able to serve Him wherever we're at.